In this video, we'll be adding a check to our anti-cheat that allows us to detect NoFall, which is a cheat that allows the cheater to not take fall damage. I'll be walking through how it works and how to code it yourself. How NoFall works is that the client can tell the server that it's on the ground, even when it's not, for example when the player is falling. However, as the server, we can calculate whether the player is actually on the ground or not, using the Y values of its position. Detecting a mismatch between these client ground and server ground states allows us to flag cheaters using NoFall. For this check, we will need to access NMS and CraftBucket, which is low-level Minecraft server code that allows us to access things that the Spigot API does not, such as player bounding boxes. We'll be using Java Reflection to do this, which allows us to access NMS in a way that doesn't depend on the Minecraft version being used. I've created this utility class called Reflection Utils, which contains useful functions that allow us to get a player's bounding box, modify it, and also check which blocks that the player's bounding box is colliding with. We'll now be augmenting the PlayerData class that we created last time with more information, including the player's bounding box, whether the player is near the ground or not, and also the value of the last server ground. Next, we'll be creating a movement listener class that will listen to player movements and update their bounding box and near ground values whenever they move. This if statement exists just to make sure that the player actually moved, because sometimes the move event can be triggered even when the player is standing still. To check whether the player is near ground, we will extend its bounding box downwards by 1 block and check whether it's colliding with any ground blocks beneath it. If it is, then get colliding blocks will return a non-empty collection, and near ground will then be updated to true. We'll be updating this class more in the future as we add more data to our PlayerData class. Now that we have everything we need, we can begin working on the actual NoFall check. We'll be using the same approach that we discussed before, while accounting for imprecisions in Minecraft's tick system. Our client ground value is essentially whatever the client tells us. This is where the hack client can lie. However, we can also calculate a server ground value. Because Y positions are set in increments of 1/64, we can check if the player's Y value, modulo 1/64, is less than a very small value in order to account for floating point imprecision. We compare client ground to the last server ground rather than the current server ground in order to account for a 1 tick desync between the two values. Then we will use a small buffer in order to protect against false positives. Finally, we can flag the player if all previous conditions are met, while logging some useful information about client ground and server ground. After we implement the logic to decrement the buffer and update the last server ground value, we are now ready to playtest this check. As you can see, I have NoFall enabled in my client, and when I jump, I will be flagged. If I turn off NoFall and jump, then I will not be flagged. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you learned something new, and I'll see you in the next one.